The mortal Jean Grey is no more.
What's going on with y'all, man? What's good? What's happening? This is your dread-headed host with yet another dose, keeping you engrossed from coast to coast. That's right. So today, I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into one of my favorite comic book aspects, the Phoenix Force. More specifically, I want to give a little explanation on those hosts of the Phoenix Force outside of Jean Grey, who is arguably the most well-known host. By this, I mean characters whose stories, abilities, and personalities I consider to be far more interesting and engaging than that of Jean Grey. Now, there is a good reason that Jean rises to the top of the pile when looking at the list of characters who have stepped into the role for varying periods of time, other than the obvious fact that Jean's character has been featured in 2 feature films in the last 13 years, meaning even the casual fan would know her name. Jean is also the perfect host for the Phoenix within the realm of Marvel Comics. Now, quick history lesson for those of you who don't know, either because you're not a huge nerd, or you believe in the flagrant blasphemies portrayed during the film incarnations, which let's just say are inaccurate. The Phoenix Force is an omniversal being which represents the sum total of life that has been, is, and will ever be. This means that until all life and existence ceases to exist across every conceivable universe, the Phoenix Force will always exist. So while the implications of this raises an innumerable amount of questions and discussion topics, for the sake of this video, the quick TLDR includes 3 main points. First, this means the Phoenix is absurdly powerful. We're talking literal god tier, even with a fraction of the Phoenix, which brings us to the second point. The Phoenix exists across every reality, and as such has taken on many different hosts outside of Jean Grey. We'll only be getting into my top picks on this one because there are so many, but we may circle back and do some deep dives later on. And third, this means the Phoenix would exist in the MCU just as sure as it was scattered across the Fox timeline, which could be incorporated with the existing Marvel Cinematic Universe and incoming X characters in so many cool ways. Oh, and one last thing. In case the graphics haven't given this away yet, the Phoenix Force typically manifests itself as a flaming bird, as the name would suggest, not some parallax cloud or this abomination. Okay, what does this mean for our main girl Jean, being that she's the perfect host? Well, essentially it means that she has the ultimate game shark and becomes nigh omnipotent. Remember how I just said someone is god tier was just a piece of the Phoenix? One thing this movie got right is its portrayal of Jessica Chastain's character as a very significant threat to the team and life in general with only a fraction of his power. But of course, Mary Sue Gray has access to the full potential of the Phoenix because of her specific set of abilities and potential and red hair. So assuming she didn't succumb to the Dark Phoenix persona, she would go on to become the White Phoenix of the Crown, which in fact is her final form. When I say she could do whatever she wants, that is no understatement. There are very few characters in the Marvel Universe I would stack up to the White Phoenix of the Crown. I guess maybe the Living Tribunal, probably because he's just that broken. And I think even God Doom from Secret Wars would have troubles. I mean, he flexed Scott Summers as the Phoenix host during that conflict, but he wouldn't have been a perfect host, and thus nowhere on par with White Phoenix Jean. So in fact, Victor might just catch these hands in a head-to-head. But I digress. This is not a video on Jeannie, it's on characters who are, in my opinion, far more interesting and even altogether superior to our traditional red-headed heroine. So, now that we're all acquainted with the prerequisite coursework, let's get into some much more interesting stuff. Let's begin this list with one of my all-time favorite characters, Quentin Quire. Now, Quentin Quire, aka Kid Omega, was introduced in New X-Men number 134. I won't go too much into the character backstory for this video because I want to dedicate a whole segment exclusively to my mans here. But the 3 main points that you need to know is that in his debut story, Quentin kicked off a riot at the Xavier Institute with a group of students calling themselves the Omega Gang, due to Quentin's disdain for Xavier's ideology and desire to coexist with humans despite the hardship they continue to inflict on mutant kind. While the riot itself was eventually quelled when the likes of Beast, Cyclops, Emma Frost, and Zorn entered the fray, along with the combined might of the drug-boosted telepathy of the Stepford Cuckoos, this was not before the riot claimed the life of one of the Cuckoo sisters, Sophie. Ironically enough, impressing Sophie was the whole reason Quentin staged the riot in the first place. So next time y'all are thinking of doing something buck wild to impress that special someone, maybe just try talking to them first and go from there. Now, the necessity of these core X-Men needing to get involved in order to suppress Quentin and his gang is no meager feat. In terms of powers and ability, Quentin Quire is an Omega-level telepath on par with the likes of Emma Frost, Jean Grey, and even arguably Charles Xavier himself, which makes him a formidable threat on his own. This, combined with his genius intellect, with a mind having been described as able to process several thousand brilliant thoughts a second, makes his ability to influence minds around him that much more powerful, even going as far to allow him to imprison others in what he refers to as the construct, which is an entire universe he's developed in his mind. Additionally, he is seen to have telekinesis, which allows him to move objects with his mind and fly at supersonic speeds, the ability to produce a psychic shotgun amongst other weapons, not unlike Cyclops' ability to create a katana made of pure psionic energy, and has used his telekinetic energy to instantly heal wounds inflicted by Wolverine's claws. Now, for a while it was unclear whether this level of power was because of the mutant drug kick that he was using leading up to the riot, which essentially acts as steroids to push his mutant abilities past their limits. After his defeat, Quentin's physical body was destroyed due to what amounts to an overdose on the drug, but instead of actually dying, he took on the form of pure psionic energy and ascended to a higher plane of existence. Eventually, we did see him reform in his physical body, first during the events of Phoenix Endsong, then more permanently when he returned in Schism. It had become clear that his powers had become that powerful at base level without using the drug kick. So he is certified Omega level in all respects on his own. Now, I can go on and on with stories of intrigue about Quentin, ranging from his times as an adversary to the X-Men, to his becoming incredibly rich and becoming the White King of the Hellfire Club, to his fluid sexuality, but I think you're starting to see why he's a much more interesting character than Miss Gray. But as I said, I do want to do a whole video dedicated to Kid Omega, so for now, let's focus on the topic at hand. Quentin's first brush with the Phoenix was during the events of Phoenix Endsong when he attempted to persuade the Phoenix to revive Sophie, who had died at the riot. At this time, Quentin, while insanely powerful, was not deemed fit to stand as host for the Phoenix in his current state. It wouldn't be until Battle of the Atom where we get a glimpse of the future version of Quentin Quire, who has become a host for the Phoenix and leader of the X-Men, who ends up facing off against the future version of Jean Grey as Zorn, and X, the son of Charles Xavier. Our first glimpse of the main timeline Marvel Universe, Quentin becoming host for the Phoenix, is during the events of Mighty Thor number 18 and 19 by Jason Aaron, where we have Quentin Quire, who was called to task by Thor, who at this point is Jane Foster, alongside Kid Gladiator and a few other Shi'ar folk to come help fend off the Phoenix Force somewhere across the galaxy. With Jane Foster battling the Phoenix on the psychic plane, Quentin is able to commune with the Phoenix Force inside the White Hot Room. Here, the Phoenix makes a comment about how at this point he's still too young to be its fully realized avatar, but does end up making a deal with Quentin, where Quentin takes on a fraction of the Phoenix's power and ends the conflict. It actually sees Phoenix Quentin being worshipped as a god, as the god, the one and only, by members of the Shi'ar Empire. Again, at this point, Quentin is not a fully realized host of the Phoenix, but with this confirmation from the Phoenix itself, which exists across all time and space, remember, that Quentin will be the Phoenix Force host in the future, I am hella excited to see what happens with this character as Marvel kind of reboots the X-Men and shuffle things around. The next host on this list is Rachel Summers. Now, Rachel has an interesting history in Marvel Comics. First appearing in Uncanny X-Men number 141, as the firstborn child of Scott Summers and Jean Grey from the Days of Future Past alternate universe, her backstory already provided the building blocks for an epic, albeit inconsistently written future. The long and short of it is that Rachel ended up entering the main Marvel universe after the events of Days of Future Past, which saw her using her psychic abilities to send the mind of Kitty Pryde back in time to stop the assassination of Senator Kelly, which ultimately ended up kicking off the events leading to the desolate Days of Future Past universe. Now, for those of you who are thinking that this sounds kind of familiar and yet wrong, you may be thinking of the Days of Future Past movie in which Kitty Pryde used her never-before and unexplained powers to send the mind of Wolverine into the past. I understand why they decided to use Wolverine as a focal point for the story. I mean, Hugh Jackman by default is going to be great, and more importantly, is going to put butts in seats, best believe. And while I disagree with Fox's flimsy explanation of why Wolverine's mind will survive the trip over the likes of Charles Xavier, by way of his physical healing factor that makes absolutely no sense, my main beef is that they gave Kitty Pryde a hitherto unbeknownst ability to fit the plot instead of just invoking another character. Obviously they couldn't use my girl Rachel, since they slammed that door by killing off Scott and Jean in the sadly superior Dark Phoenix movie X-Men The Last Stand, but Ellen Page's character suddenly having this very specific ability was just stupid. Anyway, in the books, Rachel ended up being pulled out of her own timeline by the Phoenix Force due to a request from the Kate Pryde of her future to give Rachel a fresh start. Now, there was a shard of the Phoenix that ended up bonding to Rachel and would remain in her for a time, allowing her to tap into the Phoenix Force at varying degrees depending on the situation and the writers. But more on that later. One last item of note for her character moving forward is that while she has many code names over the years, such as Marvel Girl, Phoenix, Prestige, and many others, Rachel changed her last name from Summers to Gray after the events of Gray's End in order to honor her mother's memory and seemingly to distance herself from the Scott Summers of that current timeline who was married to Madeline Pryor instead of Jean. Now, her connection to Jean Grey all but cemented her destiny in one day becoming a host for the Phoenix Force. But even without its power, Rachel is a formidable threat in her own right. Being an Omega-level telepath, she can manipulate the minds of humans and animals on a global scale, even being able to project psychic messages across the universe. She has also been shown to possess powerful empathic abilities, allowing her to read and influence the emotions of those in her range of influence. Rachel is also noted as an Omega-level telekinetic, which grants her matter manipulation, allowing her to transmute objects such as turning wood into gold a la Full Metal Alchemist style, change the look of her clothing by altering the molecules in the fabric, and grant her the ability of flight. She is also shown to have time manipulation powers on a small scale, allowing her to send the consciousness of others back into the past, like we mentioned before, and even shield herself from events that change the timeline, which happens practically every other day with the X-Men. She's also been shown to be able to create psionic weapons, not unlike Quentin Quire or Psylocke. This is all without the power of the Phoenix Force, which of course would boost all of these abilities to unimaginable levels. In many ways, I'd put my money on Rachel over Jean in a head-to-head, not just because of her wide range of abilities, but also due to her overall tenacity and ruthlessness having come from that Day of the Future Past timeline. Unfortunately, the problem with her character comes when you look at how she's been written over the years. After entering the main Marvel Universe, she's been shunted around from team to team, timeline to timeline, with almost no consistency in how her powers are depicted in terms of strength. Take for example, recently, she took on the name Prestige in the X-Men Gold run, which was not only the worst code name she ever took, but also the worst costume she's ever had, in my opinion. It was here that she was shown to be weak sauce, getting overpowered by the likes of Mastermind in a head-to-head psychic battle on multiple occasions, in a back and forth that was never resolved really in any way. Then you see her pop up again in the Inhumans vs. X-Men alongside Magneto, being written as if the two of them could just storm the Capitol and take the city themselves with minimal issue. Which, by all accounts, should be true, considering how powerful they both were, but again, not consistent. I believe the last time we saw her was in X-Men Red, when she was, yet again, subjugated by another psychic who turned her back into a hound, this time Cassandra Nova. Now, I can live with that because of how powerful a psychic Nova is, but then we get a long hyped face-off between her and Jean, which lasts all of 2 pages, and ends with Jean easily dispatching her daughter because the writers are too scared to challenge the supremacy of their Mary Sue. Hopefully, when Hickman kicks off these new X-Men books this month, we'll get a respectable depiction of her character. Fingers crossed. So next on the list, we have Hope Summers. Now, admittedly, I have mixed feelings for this character, as her history and depiction in Marvel Comics has been questionable, to say the least. First appearing in X-Men number 205, Hope is considered to be the daughter of Cable, aka Nathan Summers, which is where she gets her last name. Now, that being said, Hope is not his biological daughter, as she was adopted by Cable and taken in as his own during the events of Messiah Complex. This event saw the birth of Hope as the first mutant born after the events of House of M, when the Scarlet Witch stripped most of the mutant population of their powers and effectively sterilized their race. As it was assumed no mutants were to be born again, Hope was aptly named and was believed to be the savior of the mutant race moving forward. At the time of her birth, Hope was sought out after by a number of groups, including the X-Men, who all wanted to use her for their own purposes. Now, while briefly in the custody of Mystique, Hope is used to cure Rogue of her coma and bring her powers back under control for the first time in a long time, before then being taken to the future to be raised by Cable. Following this, she's shuffled around and goes on a few adventures here and there, but her real moment in the spotlight came during the adventures of Avengers vs. X-Men. Now, quick aside, Avengers vs. X-Men was an amazing book, which you should go read if you haven't already. Outside of that, in my opinion, it's a great place to jump into Marvel Comics. If you're looking for a place to start because of where it sits chronologically, prior to Secret Wars and all new all different Marvel, plus the fact that it has so many different characters and concepts to get a new reader's toes in the water while providing a gallery of characters to choose from if you just wanted to do further reading. Just my opinion. If you think you have a better point of view in terms of a jump off for new readers, let me know down in the comments down below so we can debate. I think that the Avengers vs. X-Men is a great place to start. Maybe you're missing some context, but ultimately, how it blends all those characters together and how wide-ranging it is across the Marvel Universe, I think it's an incredible place to start and a great story that anyone could enjoy. So, slight spoilers ahead for those of you who are actually going to go back and check out the story. During the events of Avengers vs. X-Men, Hope is determined to be the next host for the Phoenix Force and is once again sought after by the powers that be for various means. When the Phoenix initially arrives, it is broken into fragments by Iron Man's Phoenix Buster armor and ends up inhabiting mutants Cyclops, Emma Frost, Colossus, his sister Magic, and Namor the Submariner, all 5 of whom become the Phoenix Five. Now, I would be remiss if I did not give credit to this group. It is one of my favorite instances of the Phoenix Force manifesting within known characters, but I can get into a video all its own about these guys. Suffice to say, they are pretty badass. Now, without spoiling too much, Hope's great contribution comes when she eventually takes on the totality of the Phoenix's power and appears to become the White Phoenix of the Crown momentarily before she disperses the power with assistance from the Scarlet Witch that ultimately triggers the rebirth of the X gene across the planet and thus saves mutant kind. So she is the savior they were looking for. Now, my issue with this is that only Jean Grey should be able to tap into the totality of the Phoenix Force, as she is the de facto perfect host, whereas Hope isn't even related to Jean by blood. This could have just been an artistic choice for her outfit design, as they never really square the circle in the books. I think it turns out she's some type of shard of the Phoenix or some nonsense like that, but really it just serves as an overinflation of the importance of her character, because in truth, she goes on to serve no real purpose in Marvel Comics after this story. I mean, she shoots Cyclops in the face, making him a literal Cyclops in the recent Uncanny X-Men, but that's about it when it comes to her highlight reel since 2012. In terms of her own mutant abilities, Hope is an Omega level mutant with the ability to mimic the mutant powers of those in her vicinity to their utmost capacity, with seemingly no limit to the number of abilities she can manifest at once. She has demonstrated this in many ways, including mimicking the abilities of telepaths like Jean Grey and Emma Frost to guard herself from psychic attacks, copying the telekinetic abilities of Cable to assist him in battle, and even copying the chaos magic of the Scarlet Witch to a certain degree. Outside of this, she has been shown to be able to jumpstart dormant mutant abilities in those who have yet to awaken their powers, and even to boost the abilities of those in her range of influence. She is immune to the energy sapping abilities of Rogue, which is how she survived the skin-to-skin contact and cured her of her illness, and has even been hinted to have latent telepathic and telekinetic abilities of her own by Strife. All of this is to say, if the writers at Marvel really wanted, they could make an amazing story with her character, but seem to not know exactly what to do with her character, often relegating her to be somewhat of a discount Cable in some instances, and all but forgetting about her in others. Only time will tell if she gets any more shine, or if they'll just tie up the loose ends that seem to be her character, who has been historically more of a plot device than anything else. Now, the final spot on this list was reserved for one of my personal favorite characters in all of comic books, the White Queen, Emma Frost. Now, there are so many reasons why Emma Frost is such a great character, and I will be doing a video dedicated to Emma Frost where we can really get our feet wet with this character. But here's a sneak preview just to give you an idea. First appearing in Uncanny X-Men number 129, Emma Frost was originally introduced as an antagonist to the X-Men in her role as the White Queen of the Hellfire Club. Now, we can get into the Hellfire Club another time, but the TLDR is that they're a clandestine organization looking to rule the world through money, power, political influence, etc. I would say think of them as the Illuminati, but then again, there's already one of those in the realm of Marvel Comics, so try not to get them confused. As the White Queen, Emma Frost was one of the members of the Hellfire Club's inner circle, which consisted of other mutants like Sebastian Shaw and the aforementioned mutant mastermind. At the time of her introduction, the Hellfire Club was in the process of trying to take control of the Phoenix Force, which in that time resided in Jean Grey. It was these events that actually led directly into the famed Dark Phoenix saga, which in a way connects Emma to the story of the Phoenix as we know it in Marvel Comics more than any other character on this list, save for Jean herself. Now, ultimately, the plot fails when Jean is able to break free of Mastermind's illusions once the Phoenix's power is fully unleashed, and she renames herself the Dark Phoenix for the first time. But if it weren't for the amplification device created by Emma Frost herself, Mastermind would not have been able to get nearly as far with the plan as he did. From here, Emma Frost would go on to run her own academy for mutants, and lead a student team of mutants known as the Hellions, which were not unlike Charles Xavier and his X-Men. After the untimely death of her students, we would see Emma dealing with the emotional trauma of her loss and later join up with the X-Men to defeat the Phalanx and rescue a group of young mutants who would later go on to become known as Generation X, as Frost goes to reopen her academy and takes them all on as students. Unfortunately for Emma, her life would continue to be marred with tragedy as her sister Adrienne, who she sought out for financial support actually, turned out to be secretly plotting against her and is found to have planted a bomb within the school which ultimately detonates and kills one of her students. As a result, Emma Frost tracks her sister down and deals a fatal blow in retaliation. The resulting fallout will see Generation X enraged at Emma's actions and the team disbanded. From here, we will see Emma go on to join the X-Men more full-time, as well as begin her psychic affair with Cyclops, who at the time was having some marital difficulties with Jean Grey. The two would go on to lead their own team of X-Men as headmasters of the Xavier Institute after Charles Xavier steps down, and eventually the relationship between the two would blossom and the pair would become a tried and true couple when Jean Grey met her demise. Now, in my opinion, the relationship between Emma Frost and Cyclops was way more compelling than that of Cyclops and Jean Grey, as the two only seemed to be together to satisfy the stereotypical need for two available characters to be in a relationship, with Cyclops being the typical Boy Scout figure with an unbending sense of justice, at least at the time, and Jean being the typical Mary Sue. Neither of them really challenged the other to develop and grow, and the relationship really became more of a plot device to move stories forward and introduce new characters like Cable and Rachel. It wouldn't be until Cyclops' relationship with Emma began to move forward that we would see a change in his character, as well as hers, since she was always more of the bad girl and had differing moral standards than he did. Now, there is way more in terms of the backstory for Emma Frost, as she would continue to be more of an anti-hero, becoming a member of various groups who were not always necessarily on the side of good. But I would contest that at the end of the day, while Emma Frost may be ruthless and oftentimes act in her own self-interest, she is consistently shown through her remorse at the loss of her students and her actions to save others, like in the latest Uncanny X-Men, where she essentially saves all mutants from decimation by wiping the memory of mutants from the world population, that she is not definitively a bad person. As for her encounters with the Phoenix Force itself, following the events of the Dark Phoenix saga, which would mark Emma's first interaction with the Phoenix, Emma would go on to be a host for the Phoenix temporarily during the events of Phoenix Endsong in order to help quell its rampage, although at this time she's not truly able to harness its power. Eventually, we will see her become a true avatar of the Phoenix as a member of the Phoenix Five during Avengers vs. X-Men, where she, alongside the other 4 X-Men, would usher in an almost utopian society before the group began to lose themselves to the raw power they possessed. Now, in truth, by the end of the story, I would say Emma Frost, with the Phoenix she possessed, the power of the fragment she possessed, would have thraxed any of the heroes or villains on Earth that we know. Even without the totality of the Phoenix, her mutant abilities were boosted to such a magnitude that almost no one could stop her. And if it weren't for Cyclops stripping her of that power, Emma would have been nigh unstoppable. Now, let's jump into the powers and abilities of Emma Frost as they stand in the realm of Marvel Comics today. First off, like the other names on this list, Emma Frost is considered to be an Omega-level telepath and has been ranked as one of the top 5 most powerful telepaths on Earth. Her mental abilities are stated to rival that of Charles Xavier in some stories, but have also been shown to exceed his in others, where she has been shown to overpower his mental abilities. Like other telepaths, Emma can control and influence the mind of others on a global scale without the use of psychic boosting technology like Cerebrum, and is actually able to transfer her consciousness into the bodies of others, where she has full control of their powers or abilities, such as when she hijacked the body of Iceman and it was revealed that he was actually an Omega-level mutant, which is something that not even Bobby himself knew at the time. She can use her psychic powers to boost the mutant abilities of others through stimulation of neural pathways and even induce pain through the slightest physical touch. While Emma does not possess telekinesis like other characters on the list, she does have a secondary mutation which allows her to change into a diamond form, which gives her enhanced strength and durability while making her impervious to psychic attacks as well. In this form, Emma is practically invulnerable to things like heat, cold, poison, as well as physical attacks, and forces such as Cyclops' optic beams even. She doesn't even need to breathe to survive in her diamond form. This makes her an incredible threat as she can resist the influence of other psychics completely and overcome almost any physical challenge, save for maybe the full power of a rampaging Hulk. The only caveat to this is that she is unable to use her own telepathy while in her diamond form. Now, her character has been depicted on screen as we saw in X-Men First Class, where she was played by January Jones, but in my opinion this movie criminally assassinated her character when they relegated her to a simple henchman of Sebastian Shaw and eye candy for the audience. Now yes, Emma Frost is known to wear revealing clothing in the comic books, but there is more to her character than just being a dime piece. The whole idea of dominatrix is that she would be the one in power in the relationship, so the idea of her being relegated to third fiddle in that movie and then so easily dispatched really had me feeling some type of way. But as I mentioned, I'll be doing a whole video on Emma Frost specifically in the future, so for now, I digress. So there you have it. 4 characters from Marvel Comics that have played host to the Phoenix Force that I consider to be far more interesting characters than Marvel's flagship Phoenix host, Jean Grey. If you agree with the people I have on the list, or if you think there's a character I missed that should have been included on the list, let me know down in the comments. If you like this video and you want to see more content, drop a like and let me know you're loving it, and I'll keep these coming. And if there are any comic book characters or concepts you'd like me to jump into from Marvel or DC, let me know. I read books from both publishing houses and I have love for each one in my own way. So subscribe to the channel below and pop that bell for notifications so we can outsmart this new algorithm and you can stay up to date on the new content as it comes out. Follow me on Twitter for the live updates and other little blurbs that don't need a whole video. I'll link to my socials down below. But if you've been rocking with me for this long, thank you. And as always, peace.